Relations between the United States and China continue to sour as the two sides trade barbs and tariffs. In its latest report, the International Institute of Strategic Studies says this has provoked widespread concern in the Asia-Pacific, especially since the two sides are focused on decoupling or disengaging to protect their own interests. The think tank says the Asia-Pacific region is wedged by countries wanting to benefit from the existing international order pursued by the US, as well as taking advantage of engagement with China. Simon Marks joins us from the US Capitol for more on this. Simon, much of the report deals with regional security implications of China and the US becoming more competitive.
Yeah, very much so, and becoming more competitive, Steve, with the backdrop of not just chilling relations between Washington, D.C. and Beijing, but, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic as well. And so the report notes that the pandemic has further reduced bilateral defense diplomacy between Washington and Beijing. It says that while the two countries' defense establishments have continued to hold talks with each other, these exchanges have not been without tensions, and it goes on to predict that it is highly unlikely that it is highly likely that it will be difficult to restore security collaboration over the short term. So that's a very clear indication that the Institute believes that the tensions that exist at a military level between Washington and Beijing are going only to intensify with onward implications for countries throughout the region.
And the report also speaks of decoupling. Will that accelerate under the Biden administration?
Well, I mean, to some extent, de facto decoupling absolutely is extending under the Biden administration. Indeed, over the course of the next few hours, the United States Senate is posed to vote in favor of a bill that would see sweeping U.S. government assistance being poured into industries like the semiconductor industry in a bid to stand it up domestically and serve as an alternative supplier to supplies that industry in very large measure relies upon receiving from China. There's no stated policy here of decoupling at this stage, and some corporate executives absolutely are warning against it. We heard within the last week, for example, from the CEO of Western Digital, who said you can't simply decouple these two economies. Apple has issued similar warnings about the dangers to the United States of simply pulling back. However, in a de facto sense, decoupling or delinking is certainly taking place and will, within hours possibly, have the imprimatur of the US Senate if it votes in favor of that legislation.
Yeah, one last question for you, Simon. NATO is also taking aim at China, saying it doesn't share the same values. Could this influence President Biden's approach to China?
Yeah, I think this was all very carefully choreographed, frankly, between the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, who was here in Washington, D.C. On Monday for White House meetings ahead of President Biden's trip to NATO headquarters off the back of his attendance at the G7 summit in Cornwall next weekend. And the NATO Secretary General made it clear in remarks after his meeting with the president that he's absolutely in lockstep with the Biden administration on this idea that it's important for liberal democracies to come together and confront the threats posed by autocracies. And he singled out China for criticism, citing what he called its coercive behavior in the Asia-Pacific region. So absolutely a flexing of muscles taking place at the White House by the head of NATO and the Biden administration ahead of much more muscle flexing when the president gets to Europe in the next few days.
Many thanks, Simon. Simon Marks speaking to us from Washington, D.C.